When you're walking down the street, you can train your eye to see different types of light and shadow, which is a skill that will help you whether you're drawing people, landscapes, or objects. Hi, my name's Kenzo, and this is Love Life Drawing. Alright guys, it's a rare sunny day here in London, so let's take advantage of it and think about the properties of sunlight. Because light that comes from the sun, when you think about it as rays that are traveling through all that space, all the way from the sun to the earth, it's kind of mind-boggling. And it's also useful because for the rays of light to hit this place on earth from such a long distance, they have to be traveling in roughly the same direction. So they're traveling roughly parallel to each other. And it's useful to think about that when we're trying to understand the light that we're seeing. Okay, so we've got loads of direct sunlight, loads of rays of light hitting me and my arm. And you know, it sounds kind of weird, but sometimes it's useful to just look at your own hand or look at your own arm and see how the light is falling on it. So rays of light are hitting my hand and into the camera and into my eyes. But here the rays hit my other hand first and bounce away before they can hit my arm. So there's light here and not there. And that's a cast shadow. And so one thing I wanted to know was, the cast shadow is pretty clear in direct sunlight. Like from my finger on my hand, there's a pretty clear edge on the cast shadow. But as my finger moves away from my hand, the edge, I'm not sure if you can see that, but the edge on the cast shadow becomes more and more blurry, more and more vague. So why is that? It's easier to see with this tree. Where the tree is near the cast shadow, the edge is sharp. But further away from it, the edge is more blurry. Let's see why this happens using this lamp. So most light sources don't emit light from a single point. They have some width to them. There's light coming out of this end and from this end. This bit of wall is lit up fully because light from both sides can get through up here. The edges are a little bit blurry here on the cast shadow because light from this side is getting through, but not from this side. So it's not totally dark and not totally bright. So instead of shifting just from light to dark, it does it gradually. So the cast shadow edge will be sharper when the shadow casting object is close to the shadow, or when the light source is smaller, the cast shadow edge will be sharper. So here I'm just covering some of the lamp to make the light source smaller, and you can see the cast shadow edges sharpen up. It also sharpens up when the light source is further away and gets blurry when the light source is close. The sun is super far away but also really big, so it has this effect a little bit. Have a look next time you're out in sunlight. Maggie's holding the frisbee down low near the shadow and it's sharp. I'm holding it high, far from the shadow, and its edges are blurry. I've been looking back over some of Lane Brown's drawings and he's great with these edges, so I'm going to show examples from him. So when you're in direct light or you're drawing a figure in direct light, check out the cast shadows. Have a look at their edges and see whether they're sharp or blurry. Is it a crisp, clear shadow or a blurry one? It could be this phenomenon that we just talked about, or maybe there's a second light source somewhere or some reflection affecting the cast shadow. So the more you practice seeing these things, the quicker your eye is going to pick up on them. Okay, we've got form shadow edges next. First, I quickly wanted to mention our newsletter and our guide to the mindset needed for learning life drawing. You can get both of those at lovelifedrawing.com/lifedrawingsuccess. They're really useful. I think you'll like them. And just like this channel, they're completely free. So in this direct sunlight, obviously I've got a lot of light hitting this part of my arm and not hitting this part of my arm. So that's creating a form shadow here, and there's a pretty clear line where it turns that corner from light hitting it, direct sunlight hitting it, and light not hitting it. On the cube here, there is a side facing the light and a side not facing the light with a clear-cut corner between them, so the edge of the shadow is super sharp. On the cylinder, it gradually turns away from the light. It's clear where it no longer faces the light and the shadow starts, but the light side gets less bright as it curves away from the light source, so it's a slightly less clear-cut transition. Seeing these characteristics of form-shadow edges and understanding what they mean about the surface they're on is super useful for drawing people. Alright, so here I'm in shadow, I'm under a tree, the direct light isn't hitting here, but you can still see me, and that's because when light rays hit something, they bounce, and they bounce into the shadow areas too, so there's light bouncing around in here. It's just not as strong. When it bounces, it loses a little bit of its power, and it's not coming from one clear direction. Some of this light actually comes from the sky, because sunlight doesn't just directly hit the earth, it also hits the atmosphere and gets scattered around by it. And the blue light gets scattered around the most, which is why the sky appears blue to us. Sometimes in a shadow you can see a clear bit of reflected light from a specific thing, like here there's some orange light reflecting off the book into the shadow on the bottom of the egg. But there's also just more general, random bouncing light that doesn't come from one specific thing as well. So again, when you're drawing people in direct light, you can see some light is bouncing around even in the shadows. If you don't have much time, you don't need to worry too much about what is happening in those shadows, so what all that light bouncing around the shadows is telling you. You might notice some more clear reflected light from a nearby thing like the floor, and maybe that's important enough to include, but generally what's happening in the shadows is a little bit of a side plot to the main story, which is where's the direct light hitting and where is the direct light not hitting. If you do draw some of the information inside the shadows, it's good to not let it overtake the main story. So check out this drawing, see how there's loads of nuance and information within the shadows, but the contrast is low and it's kept subtle, so if you squinted, all of that would disappear. The main story is still dominant, and it's about where's the direct light hitting and not hitting. On an overcast day, this street looks totally different. This time, the direct rays from the sun are hitting the clouds before they reach us, so we don't get a lot of those parallel rays coming down. Instead, we get just the scattered, less powerful rays. It's a little bit more like what we saw in the shadows before, but now it's on everything. There are still places where the random, bouncing light is less likely to get into, so those places are still darker. But their edges are much less crisp than the cast shadows from the direct light, and those edges aren't defined by one specific light source. It's just the places where this randomly bouncing light isn't getting into. So sometimes an overcast, cloudy day feels kind of gloomy, but it's on an overcast, cloudy day when you get a better sense of the place because the lighting is more even and it's more neutral, so you can see the local colors better. So often light indoors is similarly scattered. It comes in through a window or from light bulbs, but it bounces around the walls, it gets diffused by things like lampshades, and becomes more like ambient lighting than direct lighting. So it's useful to notice whether what you're drawing is lit by direct light or more ambient light. And if it's ambient light, it won't have the clear-cut form shadows on it, which can be really useful, especially when you're drawing figures, which is why Croquis Cafe tend to use kind of straightforward direct light on their models. But ambient light will still give you some variation in values to help with your drawings, and it's a more calm and even type of lighting. Training your eye for drawing is not just about understanding things from books and tutorials, it's also about regular practice, like how an athlete regularly works out. So I think it's useful to see these things about light during everyday life. And it not only helps to train your eye for drawing, but also just makes the world a more visually rich place. So there are more videos on the screen, check one of them out. Our video about eye level is especially good.